Might be my coolest video yet. I work in a department with a lot of researching mathematicians.
Check out this video, it's great. He's got a wall of math and mathematicians talking about what their work is and how practical it is. So it inspired me to do some Sciencemancy about math. Though math is probably the field of science I know the least about, I do know something, and I want to talk today about imaginary numbers because I think there's something both practical about humanity and mystical that you can say with imaginary numbers. I'll also end with a book recommendation about numbers. So if you remember back to high school, imaginary numbers are trying to take the square root of a negative number, which should be impossible because the opposite of taking a square root is squaring it, multiplying it by itself. So if you take two negatives and multiply them together, you're always going to get a positive. So you shouldn't be able to take the square root of a negative number. So mathematicians got around that by saying if you took the square root of -1, let's just make it a symbol. Let's just make it the symbol I. And then we can treat it like one more variable like we do x in algebra. And this opened up everything. It turns out that you could manipulate the I, you could play with it, you could square it by itself and get -1 back out, and you could do a lot of practical math with these imaginary numbers. Practical in the sense that you could solve the problems, not practical in the sense that they had no idea what this math could be used for. There was no known practical application at the time, yet they continued to solve these problems and figure out how best to manipulate these imaginary numbers. Then, decades later, it turns out that this math was very important for electrical theory, how electrons move, what electricity is. And so, once we realized that you needed imaginary numbers to figure out how electricity works, it turns out humans had already greatly solved these imaginary numbers and how to work with them. And it's a really beautiful statement about human curiosity. We didn't know why they were there, but it seemed like, and here's the mystical part, that this was embedded in the fabric of the reality of this universe. And it's something you hear all the time from smart mathematicians, is that the math is just there. We are uncovering it, but it exists somehow outside of us. And I do not know math well enough to understand that really, but it's something I've heard from so many smart math people that it is there embedded in the nature of reality. And so it speaks to what could be happening with this universe, that there's something going on underlying it all. It also reminds you of the fine-tuning theory of the universe, that there are all of these constants that mathematicians and scientists use in their calculations that are just numbers that are there, like Planck's constant relating to the atom. And if those numbers were slightly different, life as we know it would not exist. And so there's an idea that this universe has been fine-tuned to allow life to exist. That being said, Jurassic Park might be right, and life would just find a way in any kind of universe, but there is something about how tightly regulated the nature of the universe seems to be. So, I will end with a great book about numbers themselves and our history with them by George Ifrah, From 1 to 0. So, from the very first number discovered to the very last number discovered, this is kind of an anthropological, mathematical history of us and just the numbers themselves. So, it's a treat. Math is a treat. Go forth and learn more.